Well, hello all, and welcome to our October edition of our Dockside Chat series. For those of you not realizing where you are in Minnesota, where this is themed from, or at least that's where our platform lives. This is the end of our Dockside chats. We're now going to be moving to Fireside chats for November. Tom reminds me gently that snow is coming, so that was appropriate, and that hopefully all boaters have gotten their boats and docks off the water as required by law in the state of Minnesota. I'm Steve Ferranti, and I'm joined here today by Tom Gunderson. And we have been doing these chats now for, I guess, well over 2 years. We're really thrilled today to have two experts to think about pharmaceutical innovation and medtech innovation in general. Paul Howard and also John O'Brien. Both folks they'll give a little bit of background to what they're doing. They're speaking just about themselves. Both of them worked more previously at HHS, Paul at FDA, and John O'Brien of a range of roles, from ASP's deputy to also basically being the drug czar for some of the pricing issues. So don't blame him yet. His policies were not enacted, so they might have been better than others. So as our custom, just to explain the ground rules, we record the first 30 minutes of this, and then we go off the record at the bottom of the half-hour period. I can reserve your questions till then. If there's something really exciting you can't wait, you can always put it in to the chat, and we'll have you put your cameras on when you want to ask questions when we get to the off the record part. So this is really an incredible conversation. It's something that just to kick this off a little bit. What something's always been fascinating me over the last, I think, 6 or 7 years or so is this notion of we have so many opportunities now that we never had 10 years ago for like serious cures of major diseases, cancers across a whole range of different attitudes, things. And then typically what would happen is that in the U.S., one would expect, well, we got all the money, but other countries are much more constrained. Except there was this moment actually at one of our previous Caribbean Health Economics Symposiums, they're real, trust me, where Carl Claxton, who's a UK health economist and quite a character, former guest speaker at Millie, was one of these real experts at NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which in the UK determines a lot of whether drugs are going to get paid for or technology at all. And there was a case made about, what are we going to do about these new Hep C drugs? This is 2017. It was relatively new when all this stuff was coming out. Super expensive. Health insurance companies were freaking out at the time. John, you probably remember different people from Blue Cross Blue Shield plans coming and saying, we're going to go bankrupt. We need to have new reinsurance policies just because of all these things that were there. And the thought was, this is, we can't afford this. And Carl's quite a character, if you know Carl. Carl just sort of like starts yelling and saying like, no, we can. It's a cure. It can actually get to people much earlier in their lives. We marked this at, I think it was like 18 or 19,000 quality adjusted life years saved, which is below our threshold for NICE, and we're just going to pay for it. And it floored the room, and it raised the question of like, well, this is a whole different perspective. It's a super expensive drug, but since it's cure, it comes at a much different level. And so I'm going to pass the baton quickly to Tom just to sort of frame what are burning questions about this as a topic, and then I think we're going to transition to Paul to give a little bit of intro about what these technologies are, and then John can tell us why they're so unaffordable and what we can do to maybe deal with them. So Tom.
So thanks, Steve. And just as a reminder to the audience, what we're doing here is an hour conversation with a half hour on the record and a final half hour not recorded off the record, and we will be making that switch obviously in less than 30 minutes now. The way I wanted to set this up is it seems like we're doing this as a US discussion, right? At least predominantly. And we're doing this then within not only the political system, but also within a capitalistic system. And it seems, just to make it simple as we try to delve down into the details, is you've got the government on one side saying, okay, on products, pharmaceuticals, etc., we'll give you, for unique products that are patented, we'll give you 17 years exclusivity, which allows in certain categories monopoly on a particular product, at least for a while, maybe not for the full 17 years, but at least for a while, and pricing goes up accordingly. On the other hand, healthcare costs are going way too high, according to most polls, and the government is looking to push back on pricing. And so we've got two ends of the government here, two sides of the government. That one is pushing sort of towards higher pricing on the patent office side, one on the lower on the CMS side, and we'll see what happens. But that's sort of the background of all of this. And I'll pass this on to John and Paul. Take it, guys.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much, Steve and Tom. And really honored to be here with John and the group here today. I think that's pretty much accurate. By the way, just for full disclosure, I'm currently Senior Director of Public Policy at Amicus Therapeutics, a rare disease-focused company, but I'm speaking, as Steve said, only on my own capacity. Nothing I'm saying now reflects anyone else's opinions other than my own. The U.S. is the acknowledged leader in biomedical innovation, and it's, for one of the exact or among the factors, is the issue that Tom just alluded to. We have a very strong intellectual property system. We have a robust venture capital system where you have a lot of investors that are seeking the best returns on investment. You have a really actually good set of laws passed by Congress, including things like the Orphan Drug Act, the Bayh-Dole Act, which encourages universities to enact tech transfer and move intellectual property out of university labs and into for-profit startup companies. And that has generated a globe-leading environment for biotech discovery, where the U.S. generates the lion's share of Nobel Prizes and world-saving medicines that eventually become part of the world's medicine chest. The problem or challenge with that is a couple of things. First and foremost is the fact that U.S. healthcare costs pretty much regularly outstrip GDP growth. The U.S. has a aging population, and so our entitlement programs, including our healthcare entitlement programs like Medicare and Medicaid, are eating up more of our domestic spending, especially when you look at things like interest on the debt and deficit, which are consuming more and more of our spending. And at the state level, states, unlike the federal government, are actually required to balance their books every year. And so any price increase for them, whether it's pharmaceuticals or hospitals or nursing homes, can be really, really quite painful. And the least predictable part of those payments is the pharmaceutical industry. Because despite the best efforts of Wall Street and biotech, we cannot always predict what medicines are going to come to market. And as Steve alluded to, you can have a new discovery like the Hep C medicines, which had 95% cure rates, but at the time were significantly more expensive than previous therapies, which had really nasty side effects and weren't all that effective. And they are boluses onto state budgets. So we have the picture of the macro side of trying to figure out how to temper healthcare costs and make them more sustainable while maintaining high access, especially for potentially curative treatments, and at the same time encourage more investment in those treatments. And the science is just moving ahead in leaps and bounds in many ways. In just the past few years, and I spent 2 years at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where I was a senior advisor to Scott Gottlieb, we saw the very beginnings of the gene therapy revolution that's still ongoing. But you have the first gene therapies for rare diseases. You have the first cell-based therapies for cancers like leukemia and lymphoma that are quite effective. You have a larger number of those products that are coming down the pike, and you have them entering a healthcare system that's already in crisis in many ways. You have them entering a very fragmented, siloed healthcare system where industry has wanted for some time to have outcomes and value-based payments, but a lot of the federal rules and regulations that John can talk about in depth make it very hard for states to have really long-term view into pricing agreements like that. And because healthcare is delivered locally, and in fragmented ways that push drugs and home care and hospital care into different silos. Even if you have a really effective way of treating or curing a disease, a cancer, a rare disease, or even an infectious disease like Hep C, you can make it so that something that looks artificially expensive is hard to come by and hard to get, even when we know that over the long term for the healthcare system, it's going to save lives and save costs. I think some suggestive things that we could talk about here, as we are on the verge of new therapeutics for gene therapy, gene editing, and applications of artificial intelligence that are helping to unlock new biological targets and make faster decisions about what's potentially safe and effective in a human being, as opposed to using animal models. How do we go about doing this? I think it is really about learning how to learn faster, making faster decisions based on better science, but getting to more of the data that we need to make a decision faster at the drug development end, faster at the FDA regulatory approval end, and then really learn more effectively about what works in the real world so that we can have reimbursements that really fit value and outcomes in a thoughtful way. But the challenge, again, and I'll let John talk about this, is that we have a system that's fragmented. We have a system in which third-party payers, called pharmaceutical benefit managers, have perverse incentives to actually bid up the price of drugs because their own revenues are associated with the discounts they negotiate. And I think at the last count, drug manufacturers only receive about 48 or 49% of the price of a drug. The rest is split between the intermediaries that make up the drug supply chain. So the problem of out-of-pocket costs, the problem of costs to the healthcare system, and the problem of sustainability has to be thought of at a system-wide level in a system that's really very fragmented. But let me just stop there and let John offer some thoughts.
I don't have anything else to say, Paul. You covered everything.
Excuse me.
So in all seriousness, it's great to be here. I'm John O'Brien. I'm the president and CEO of the National Pharmaceutical Council. For those of you who aren't subscribed to our website or following us on LinkedIn, NPC is a 70-year-old health policy research organization. We actually turned 70 on December 1st of this year. And our members are about 20 of the top biopharmaceutical companies whose medicines are relied on by the patients in the US and around the world. We have a research team that works tirelessly to connect some of the dots that Paul just described. But we don't just conduct research and hope to see it in a journal someday. We do research that we communicate with impact so that policymakers, patient advocates, others can use it to participate in questions just like this one. And the reason that that's so important is, as Tom pointed out at the top, there's a lot of contradiction and hypocrisy. There are a lot of, I'll just say, uninformed statements that are thrown around. And there are some really hard problems that need really bright thinkers to help solve. So as Paul said, we are living in the golden age of pharmaceutical innovation. We've cured Hep C. We're treating breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer, at home with a tablet or capsule. We've gone from being able to make HIV/AIDS a chronic condition to now preventing it with a pill that you take every day, to an injection that you can get every month or two, and someday that could be even every 6 months to a year. But we're paying for these medicines with the same reimbursement system that was built for the statins and blood pressure drugs of the late 90s. And the way that system works is exactly how Paul described. And my concern is that when purchasers pay for healthcare, they're by and large being pushed to a system that is seeking to arbitrage the price of drugs and profit on the difference between the list and the net price. And I'm not just speaking about pharmacy benefit managers and insurers. I'm talking about the employer benefit consultants that show up at an employer in response to a request for proposals And they don't say this is a formulary that's going to get you the best medicines to lower your total healthcare costs and ultimately help you beat a premium trend on all of your spending. It's this is how much rebate revenue we can generate for you in this year, and this is how much that revenue is going to grow over the year. But everybody's getting squeezed right now. Employers are facing not just inflationary healthcare costs, but inflationary costs, period. Providers are being asked to do more with less as insurers are pushing down on them to try to meet the cost concerns of employers. And the incentives that Paul described are really helping to perpetuate the problems of that system. If I've learned anything as a pharmacist, it's that the medicine you receive, the price you pay, and the care you ultimately get is more a function of the insurance card in your wallet than the training of your medical practitioner. So when we talk about the future, you know, Paul, there's a lot I'd like to talk about in terms of how to make the most of the value benefit designs we've described. I think moving the anti-kickback and the best price problems out of the way is only one step. I think helping employers understand what the value of these durable therapies are and trying to build a reimbursement system that follows the patient, because we recognize that not everybody is going to work for the same employer for the rest of their life. That's an open question. But if we want an example of what not to do, let's just look at what the Inflation Reduction Act calls the drug pricing negotiation program. First of all, it's not a negotiation. Being told this is the price that you're going to accept, and if you don't like it, we're going to hit you with a giant excise tax is not the definition of the word negotiation that I learned. Secondly, it might not even be legal. But beyond those two concerns, there are a lot of unintended consequences that are working against the promise of innovation that Paul described. The first is that I'm afraid that we're going to see delayed launches of medicines. Because the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act is essentially a loss of exclusivity event, but without doing patent reform. So Tom described this is how much exclusivity you get, but now the government's going to come in and say, well, we appreciate that, but in the Medicare program, we're going to set your price after 9 years of being on the market if you're a small molecule, or 13 years of being on the market if you're one of the top biologics. And once those prices are set and posted on a government website, you can bet that they're going to ripple through the commercial market as well. So because of that clock, it unfortunately puts developers in a position of saying, do we want to do what we used to do, which was bring this drug to the market as soon as we know it can be helpful in a smaller population of people and generate more evidence while waiting to get the evidence, to get the approval to help a larger population of people? Or now, because there's only a finite time, should that lead to maybe waiting until there are more people that can be served right out of the gate? I also fear that because of the clock that we just discussed, it's going to make manufacturers question the value of doing the additional research to get new indications for their medicine. And because doing that additional research can help prove not just that a drug is safe and effective, but that a drug is effective against long-term outcomes. I think that's going to have a chilling effect on evidence generation, and that's really important for guideline developers. So those are my top of mind thoughts about what Tom referred to at the top as the drug price negotiation program. As I think through what CMS has put out in terms of how this program is going to work, I can't find a transparent and reproducible process that is going to allow developers who might not be in this year's tranche of top 10 drugs to be able to prepare for future negotiations as well. And as the people in this audience know better than anybody, investors don't like uncertainty. At the same time, the government hasn't said what it's really going to value or what evidence it's going to value most. So that's also putting sponsors in a very difficult position of trying to figure out what kinds of research they want to do to prepare to participate in this conversation going forward. So aside from this not being a negotiation, aside from it maybe not even being legal, our focus right now is trying to encourage a more transparent and reproducible process by inviting manufacturers in and sort of creating a two-way street about that conversation. What Paul was referring to in regards to value-based contracting for medicines is that many manufacturers recognize that because their drug can help offset or prevent additional medical costs or additional kinds of treatment, they kind of wanted to put their money where their mouth was and say, look, we believe that this medicine is going to achieve this outcome, rather than give you a giant, upfront rebate or discount on the product. We're going to sell it to you at a value-based price. And if it's effective, we keep that. If it fails to achieve the outcome, then we will reimburse you all or some of the cost of that medicine. And there's probably 20, 30 value-based agreements in the marketplace right now. Those couldn't exist a few years ago because manufacturers have to give state Medicaid programs the best price of any commercial payer. And there was a concern that if I gave you back all or some of the price of a medicine, that would be viewed as a discount. And therefore, I could be establishing the best price of that medicine at $0. And therefore, the entire Medicaid program would now have to give it for free. So CMS has done some regulations to move that out of the way. I still think there are some concerns about anti-kickback and whether or not government pricing and other lawyers at pharmaceutical manufacturers have the confidence to be able to participate in these agreements as robustly as they could. But aside from the regulatory concerns, I think it's still going to be challenging for us to build the kind of data infrastructure that will allow us to measure the effectiveness of these contracts, while at the same time even coming to agreement on what outcomes we're trying to insure against. So Steve, Tom, Paul, that's a lot of wonky stuff on government pricing, but I hope that's a good conversation starter.
Absolutely is. I'm going to throw a question to you, John, just to get your response, and then I'll give it to Tom, and that might take us to the half-hour point. But the question I have, hopefully super quick, is something that, as you saw, inside the budget, there's about $3 billion or so that's earmarked for essentially CMS staff to do the pricing for these for the drugs in the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. It struck me, and that effectively is the government saying that, or is Congress saying, because they put the law in, that we're now going to have cost effectiveness analysis inside of government without explicitly saying it. Recall the Affordable Care Act basically said we're not. We're going to call it comparative effectiveness. We're going to leave the word out cost because they just don't want to hear about it. They were concerned about Sarah Palin and death panels and things like that when the Independent Payment Advisory Board, IPAB, was circulating around a dozen years ago. I guess my question is, John, given that it is, as you said, not a negotiation, it's like, here's the price. What's given that $3 billion is mostly going to go to contract FTEs and or people that CMS is going to hire? I mean, what's that group supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. What they're saying today is that they're going to participate in a comparative clinical effectiveness exercise. And they're going to approach that very qualitatively, right? So they're going to select a therapeutic alternative, which may or may not be the right therapeutic alternative for that drug or the top indication that ultimately put it in the Medicare top 10 list. And then they're going to look at a variety of factors to determine what the initial starting point of the negotiation should be versus the therapeutic alternative. And then they're going to adjust that initial starting point up or down based on a variety of factors, including your research and development costs, whether you recouped them, what other patents you may have, how long they're going to be enforced for, a number of things that have nothing to do about the value of a medicine. So I am really concerned that CMS is preparing to enter into something that is intended to be cost effectiveness analysis, health technology assessment, whatever you want to call it, when they move from the qualitative exercise of comparative effectiveness to the very quantitative activity of setting a price. And that's why I feel it's a really exciting time to be at NPC. We're devoting a lot of resources to how best to measure and communicate what value looks like in a post-IRA world. And we've recently hired one of the nation's top experts on the science of value assessment. And what Dr. Campbell reminds me is, whether it's the quality, whether it's another measure of health gain, all measures have trade-offs. And value assessment is a science that is largely influenced by the judgments you make about what assumptions that you're going to use. And again, that's why I think it's so important for there to be more of an open conversation about what the agency is actually trying to do and build a more transparent and reproducible process so that everybody understands exactly what it is that CMS is and isn't going to value.
Tom, you get to close this out.
All right. Well, I'll have a 5-minute question and a 10-minute answer, and we'll probably go a little beyond that half-hour point. John, I think what I'll do is offer you a 3-part answer. You can give part 1 on the record, and we'll do the other 2 parts off the record. But we're getting kind of a, hey, this isn't going to work, and this isn't a system, etc. But we'd all, I think, the majority of us would agree that healthcare's too expensive. It shouldn't be 17%, 18% of GDP, etc. So what do we do to reduce those prices? I look at Medicare Part D. I think I read in an article this morning that it covers 43 million people. So if we go to the other side, if we go to the government side and say, I've got an insurance company with paying for drugs, I know they do it through the privates, but paying for drugs for 43 million people, and I'm paying too much. Telling 10 drug companies now and 20 later and 30 later just doesn't seem to be anybody's idea of the right solution. Maybe a political comment, but not the right solution to get it done. If you were to pick 3 things the government could do, what that actually would help reduce the cost without getting in the way of innovation, what would it be?
Well, gosh, I feel like you answered a lot of the question for me, right? First, this is a political exercise, and the reason the law passed is because of polling data that says Democrats, independents, and Republicans all believe that there's an affordability problem on prescription medicines. But if you ask my mom what the cost of her medicine is, the answer to the question is what they charge her at the pharmacy counter or what shows up on her explanation of benefits. It's not the list price of the medicine. It's not the net price of the medicine. And I want to know why prescription medicines are the only healthcare good or service for which the patient cost sharing is based on the billed amount, not the allowed amount. When my primary care doctor charges me $200 for a physical exam, the insurance company says, how about $64? And when I go to pay my cost sharing in the deductible, I'm paying $64. I'm not paying the artificially inflated price that the doctor used. So making sure that the discounts and the price that the insurance company is actually paying is reflected in the cost sharing that the patient is being asked to pay is an important thing that the government could do. It's a regulation that we put out in the last administration that was actually delayed to help pay for this legislation. So I'm kind of scratching my head about, you know, why they delayed something that actually would have saved people money at the pharmacy counter to pay for something that has the potential to hurt innovation. The second thing is
hold on. We're going to stop recording.
Oh, no, we're still in the.
Okay.
We're gonna let her rip, Tom.
We're gonna let it run. All right.
No, look, I just the other thing I wanted to say, but before we wrap, is, you know, the importance of competition. 7 of the 10 drugs that are on the government's list already have net prices that are lower than what the Congress directed CMS not to pay any more than. So I fear that we're being set up for a situation where the government's on the 1-yard line and they're going to punch into the goal line and scream touchdown. And in reality, competing manufacturers with competing products, with competing insurers, have been doing a great job making prescription drugs more affordable. But the people that stand in the middle aren't making them affordable for patients. And we talked about Hep C. We are now curing Hep C in this country for about $12,000. These drugs launched at $84,000. They're now $12,000. Some states are getting them for free. And even though they're free, not everybody who needs to get them is getting them. So again, for me, it comes back to the way that the incentives are flowing in the system, not the way the medicines are priced.
All right, John, thank you for keep on the record a little bit longer than that. I know you wanted to get that on the record. It's an
important point.
It is a super important point, and one that also is there as well. I mean, well, I'll take us off the record and then we can continue our conversation here. But formally, let me thank you, John and Paul. I know Paul had to step out for a great conversation. I'm fairly certain I'm going to be using this in my class for the next 3 years for sure, just for tracking purposes and just a lot of education. So thank you, Tom, too, for there. I think there's a lot of policy that's embedded there. So we are officially going off the record now.